yesterday, talking to the people that, I flew through Chicago, picked up a bunch of people in Chicago, talked to people in the airplane, talked to Lisa, a terrific stewardess on, what do we call them? Flight stewards? What do we call them now? Attendants? I don't know.
Flight attendants.
Flight attendants. Lisa's just a big listener of the show, big supporter of the Nixon Library, and we talked on and off throughout the show. We think Adam Schiff is God's gift to Republicans. We do. We think Adam Schiff, otherwise known as Congressman Kramer from Seinfeld, because they're the same person. Adam Schiff and Kramer are the same person. And I want to set this up I want to set up Donald Trump's comments on the South Lawn yesterday by again playing for, you've got to understand who Adam Schiff is. Congressman John Campbell was on the after show with Dwayne 3 nights ago. Congressman Campbell, 10 years in Congress, 6 years in the California State Senate, 6 years in the California Assembly, massively successful businessman, lives in Scottsdale, Arizona now, and occasionally shows up to work in the radio whenever he's not, golfing, playing bridge, or driving around fancy cars. Congressman Campbell says this about Adam Schiff to Dwayne.
So I served in Congress from 2005 to 2015. Adam Schiff was already there since he was elected, I believe, in 2000. He represented a part of the greater Los Angeles area, as he still does today, Glendale, Pasadena, and I represented a part of the greater Los Angeles area at that time in Orange County, Newport Beach, Irvine, and areas there. I went on NPR, the local NPR radio station, quite a bit, as did he. And after a few years or so, the local NPR affiliate in Los Angeles decided that we were a good pair to put us on essentially together, myself and Adam Schiff, as debating one another on the radio for the audience in Los Angeles, Republican and a Democrat, both from Los Angeles. And what I learned during a number of those appearances, they weren't appearances, we were both on the phone, on the radio, but I learned a lot about Adam Schiff during that period. And one of the things I learned was there were times he would throw out statistics, because we'd be arguing, debating on something. He'd throw out some statistic. And I'd go back to my staff and I'd say, okay, Adam Schiff just said this. I said, what? I've never heard this. I've never seen this statistic. Look it up. And we would look up everywhere and we couldn't find it. And this happened more than one occasion where we believe at the end, we believe he just made them up. That, he just made up things in order to give him some credence in a debate kind of a setting. And then the other thing I noticed was there were several times he would say things that were absolutely patently false, just completely not true, and everyone knew it. But if it were true, it helped his argument. And he would say them with such conviction and such veracity that from that point on, I probably trust Adam Schiff less than any other member of Congress, Republican or Democrat, because I could see and experience the way he could say things that he knew were absolutely not true with total conviction, such that I believe he would have passed a lie detector test, even though he knew what he was saying was not true. And he would use all this in debates and this sort of setting. And I eventually stopped doing it because you can't win, you can't argue with somebody who makes stuff up, and then in addition to that, says things that he knows are absolute falsehoods in order to help his argument.
That's part one. Then John Campbell goes on and adds a little bit of dessert on Adam Schiff.
I believe he's the least trustworthy. I disagree with Barney Frank on a million things. I would absolutely trust him. And he wouldn't do stuff like this. I've debated him a bunch of times. He never did this. Sometimes I felt like I won. Sometimes I felt like I lost, because Barney Frank's very smart, but he never did anything like this. I was on the committee with Maxine Waters, served on the committee with her. I'm not a big fan of Maxine's. I'm not sure she was a big fan of mine, but she didn't do stuff like this. And to my knowledge, Maxine never lied to me about anything. I never had a whole lot of interaction with Nancy Pelosi, though. So to be fair, I don't have as much of a read on her, but at least on those other two that you mentioned, I'd trust either one of them over Adam Schiff any day of the week.
So understand, Adam Schiff cannot be trusted. He's also not very reliable. That's why I call him Congressman Kramer from Seinfeld. He's very upset over what he heard in testimony yesterday, closed-door testimony, so we can't judge it. The headlines are, Trump envoy pushed Ukraine to commit to investigating Biden. That's in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Trump wanted Ukraine's president to launch investigations before face-to-face meetings. State Department text show. In the Washington Post, Trump public calls on China to investigate Biden's. In the New York Times, Trump publicly urges China to investigate the Bidens. In the Washington Post, IRS whistleblower. This is new. Said to report Treasury political appointee might have tried to interfere in audit of Trump or Pence. So you see what they're trying to do. Bunch of allegations. In fact, it is perfectly legitimate and appropriate for the president to get to the bottom of what Ukraine's connection with the Russian hack on our election in 2016 is, and it is perfectly appropriate to find out if Hunter Biden is compromised by Ukrainian and Chinese money. Here is Donald Trump on the White House lawn, cut number 6 yesterday.
If you look at the whistleblower's complaint, it's totally inaccurate because the conversation that I had was absolutely perfect, and most people that have read it say the same thing. The whistleblower never saw the conversation. He got his information, I guess, second or third hand. He wrote something that was total fiction, and now when people see that, they're not happy.
He went on then to talk about China, cut number 7.
I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer. They should investigate the Bidens, because how does a company that's newly formed, and all these companies, if you look at, and by the way, likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens, because nobody has any doubt that they weren't crooked. That was a crooked deal, 100%. He had no knowledge of energy, didn't know the first thing about it. All of a sudden, he's getting $50,000 a month, plus a lot of other things. Nobody has any doubt. And they got rid of a prosecutor who was a very tough prosecutor. They got rid of him. Now they're trying to make it the opposite way, but they got rid. So if I were the president, I would certainly recommend that of Ukraine.
So they think that's impeachment. That's what Adam Schiff thinks is impeachable, that the president said, if I were China, I would investigate this. You know what? That's what you should do when you think there's corruption. You should say, hey, here's some corruption. They should look at it. You know, the media lives in such a bubble, they think that's going to work. It's not going to work. By the way, the president went down to the villages in Florida and gave a speech and said, why are they doing impeachment? He explained it, cut number 10.
In America, we believe in freedom and liberty, not government domination and government control. Today, standing in solidarity with our nation's seniors, I declare once again that America will never be a socialist country. Will never be. You want to drive him crazy? Don't do 4 more years. Say 8 more years, you'll drive him crazy. One of these crazy maniacs on the show was interviewing somebody, radical left, and he goes, you know he's going to win, don't you? Big show. And the guy goes, no, we're going to fight him. No. He's going to win. And you know he's never getting out. You know that, don't you? He's not going to get out. You know he's... And I thought, he's a comedian. I thought he was, kidding and having fun. He meant it. These people are sick.
Donald Trump has their number. He has driven so many people around the bend. All right? So they get a White House statement about China. They want to turn it into an impeachable offense. They got little tiny people running around on government flying whistleblower complaint. It's all nonsense. It's Kramer and Newman and a business scheme. That's all it is. Stay tuned, America. I'm going to continue my conversation from yesterday with Jack Goldsmith about his wonderful book, In Hoffa's Shadow. Stay tuned.
The Hugh Hewitt on the Salem. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Yesterday, I began talking with Harvard Law School professor Jack Goldsmith about his book, In Hoffa's Shadow. It's an amazing book. We continue to talk after the show ended. I want you to hear it. Cut part number 2. To the back of the book, the 2 biggest investigations in the 70s by the FBI, which I did not realize until it was put right in front of me in Hoffa's Shadow, Hoffa and Hearst. To be the biggest investigation, what does that mean in terms of resources, Jack Goldsmith?
There were hundreds of FBI agents and tens of thousands of FBI hours expended on the Hoffa investigation, all across the country. I went through literally tens of thousands of documents, maybe not tens of thousands, many, many, many thousands of documents, so it was just a huge investigation, and the case is still open.
Now, the second half of this interview, I want people to understand one of the side benefits of In Hoffa's Shadow. I often tell people the federal government is not your friend. You have got to be very, very careful when you deal with them. Chucky O'Brien is perhaps Exhibit A in my Hall of Fame of why the federal government is not your friend. And Hoffa now, too, because of Robert Kennedy. I mean, Robert Kennedy's in this book. Richard Nixon's is in Hoffa's Shadow. Would you explain to me what the prosecutorial abuse was that was directed against Hoffa by Kennedy and against Chucky O'Brien?
Sure. Against Kennedy, I mean, look, Hoffa had committed many sins, and he was a serial lawbreaker. But Bobby Kennedy had a vendetta against him going back to the 1950s when he was on the McClellan Committee. And during the McClellan Committee, he committed many abuses that were well documented at the time. When he became Attorney General, it was his main goal, his first priority was to remove Hoffa from office. He devoted all of the resources of the department to it. In what was basically still today the paradigmatic example of prosecutorial excess. He surveilled illegally many of Hoffa's associates, including my stepfather. He used the IRS abusively to collect information on Hoffa and all of his friends, even when there was no allegation of wrongdoing. He was just very, very, very aggressive in going after Hoffa.
And Nixon and Hoffa, Nixon abused power in your book in manipulating the terms of Hoffa's release from prison. And so Hoffa is at the victim at the beginning and at the end of the federal government.
I mean, Hoffa wasn't, just to be clear, I mean, Hoffa was,
he's not a normal, he's not admirable.
No, he's no angel. Well, he was admirable in some ways, I think, but he was no angel. But one of the themes of the book is government excess in the pursuit of enemies within. And you saw it in the Kennedys, you saw it in J. Edgar Hoover, you saw it in Richard Nixon. I think you saw it to some extent in Chucky in the way he was treated when the government figured out a couple of decades ago that it did not think that he was involved in the Hoffa disappearance, even though they had let it been believed publicly that he was the person who drove Hoffa to his death. And they could have and said they were going to exonerate him publicly, and then they didn't follow through. So the government is often not honorable in these pursuits, and I think in Chucky's life they certainly haven't been so.
Well, they are driven, and if they get into a narrow focus, they are driven in the wrong direction. I would tell you a long story about Earl Palmer once, about him driving in the wrong direction on a highway for a long time till he saw the sun coming up in the east, and he still thought, oh my, that's a big fire over there. He thought he was going west, but he was going east. That is what happened with the Hoffa investigation. They thought they were going west, but they were going east.
They went in the wrong direction for a long time. It was understandable that Chucky was a suspect early on. There were a lot of circumstantial evidence that pointed to him being involved, and frankly, they didn't have any good evidence of anyone else. But they did put all their resources in one basket, and it turned out not to be the right basket.
I'll play the rest after the break. Let me remind you, Alliance Defending Freedom, we've got to get money to them. They're fighting a major case in front of the Supreme Court right now on the definition of non-discrimination in Title IX. And it's called the funeral home case, and I'll tell you about it throughout the days. But these people fight every day for the obvious original intent of statutes. They fight every day for religious liberty. They fight every day for a United States of law as opposed to regulation, for a United States of representatives, not of courts. They fight every day for you. Alliance Defending Freedom is your ACLU. It is actually defending your freedom The special donation number, toll-free, 866-700-1060. Any amount, $5, $50, $500, $5,000, 866-700-1060, or the banner at hughhewitt.com. Come right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Citizens for Truth in Drug Pricing.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thanks so much for listening to the program this morning. Coming up, Sonny Bunch after the break, our official movie critic next hour, Tim Alberta, Jonathan Swan, Florida Senator Rick Scott. We've got Dean Matthew Spalding of Hillsdale College coming up. But first, let me finish. This is the last bit of my interview with Jack Goldsmith, talking about his incredible new book, In Hoffa's Shadow. Now, I want to go back, if I can, Jack Goldsmith, to the beginning, the first 50 pages where you tell your story, because I think it's everybody's story who comes from a family about whom there is some shame, which is they have to reconcile that shame with who they are, and eventually they have to integrate it with that they're not everything that's bad and they're everything that's good. How long did it take you? I'm kind of missing the chronology when you reconciled with Chucky after shedding him like a coat that's got a bad smell on it for a while and then figuring out, well, I'll dry clean the coat and use what's best.
Right. So here's the story in brief. I was very, very close to Chucky. He was my idol when I was a teenager. I really revered him, and he was an amazing father. But to make a long story short, when I got to college and law school, I started to understand more about his life, more about the mafia, and I started to think about my own career and my own professional ambitions. And again, to make a long story short, I unceremoniously blew him off when I was in law school. And that was in the late 80s, and we didn't really speak much for 20 years. And over the course of my time in the government, believe it or not, I started to think about him and maybe rethink what I had done to him. When I got out of the government, I had a very searing experience in the government. I had 2 very young children, which made me think much differently about fatherhood and loyalty. And I came to understand just how much pain I had caused him when I was a younger man. And I also came to think that I wasn't so morally virtuous and he wasn't so morally poor, that we both had complicated lives. And so basically, about 6 months after I left the government, at Christmas of 2004, Chucky and I reconciled, and I asked for his forgiveness. He let me back in his life without any question, without any quibbles. And we've been very close ever since. Indeed, we've grown closer in the last 15 years than we've ever been.
You know, I think one of the great virtues of In Hoffa's Shadow is Chucky O'Brien is a figure fully drawn. And I admire that which is admirable, and I do not like and reject that which isn't. But you can pass along. I think everyone who ever reads this book will say, I'd like to meet Chucky O'Brien. I'd like to talk to him, but he probably won't talk to me about what I want to talk to him about because he's still deeply loyal to the people to whom he undertook omerta. Is that true?
That's true. I talked to him for 7 years, many, many hundreds of hours of conversation. And he told me a lot of things, including maybe some things he wasn't supposed to tell me. But for the most part, and he wanted to try to help me write the book, and he told me what he could, and he actually revealed quite a lot. And he's an enormously interesting man. I learned a ton from him. But he's essentially committed to not speaking about things that he's not supposed to speak about, and those things he's going to take to his grave.
Now, Jack Goldsmith, you might find this interesting. I have 2 acquaintances who are both long-term Nixon people. They served in the Nixon White House. They knew Richard Nixon very well, and they have books underway. And I sent to them both the message, read In Hoffa's Shadow, because what you're trying to do is a memoir at the same time you're trying to write history. It's a very difficult genre. I don't actually know that I've encountered this genre before, at least not from someone I can trust in the way that I trust you. Did your publisher immediately say, this isn't going to work?
It was tough. The publisher didn't say it wasn't going to work. In fact, the publisher encouraged me to go in these directions when I started to tie in Hoffa's and Chucky's relationship and their relationship to organized crime and the history of organized crime and how that all grew up together. They encouraged me to pursue it, but getting it right, making it clear, figuring everything out, and putting it in an accessible form that tied in with the narrative, that took a lot of work.
Has it been optioned by television yet? Because I think this is a mini-series for Netflix, Amazon. I just think this could be made into a very compelling bit of drama.
The book's been out for a week, and I've received a few requests from producers of various sorts, but nothing's happened yet, no.
A week, it's just getting out there. I'm not surprised. Let me conclude by talking to you about the central character, who is Jimmy Hoffa. And the fact that American labor, I grew up in a union town, UAW, United Steelworkers. I'm, in fact, a member of the union, the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, and SAG-AFTRA. And so I know unions. I know their good parts. I don't like public employee unions. I greatly admire private sector unions for what they did for the working man. How central, just straight question, how central to organized labor was Jimmy Hoffa?
He was absolutely central in the 1950s and 1960s. He was the most powerful labor leader in the country, leading the most powerful union. But he was also on the outs with the rest of establishment labor, so to speak, and that was a tragedy for organized labor, I think.
And is it fair to say he did whatever he thought he had to do to benefit the working man?
He did. He was completely amoral. He would do business with anyone on any terms if it brought him an advantage that would help him to help his union and the members. And he was enormously popular with his union members because he brought home the bacon to them in a big way.
Where did that commitment come from? It's the central question of Hoffa, the central question of his character. Why was he so committed? And originally, it's the driver, but the Teamsters organized everywhere. Why was he so committed to these people?
He grew up in the union. When he was still a teenager, there was a famous event when he was working at Kroger's, and he and some older men, basically, they were being treated absolutely horrible by the foreman. This was the 1930s in Detroit, when if you even breathed union, you would be fired and never be able to get a job again. But he was being treated so abusively that he famously organized a walkout at a time that put economic pressure on Kroger's, and Kroger's folded even at the time when unions were so unpopular. And from that moment on, I think he realized that he had a real identity with the worker. He also grew up and saw terrible poverty, and he experienced the really just hard to fathom poverty of the workers in Detroit when he was a young man. And he, from a very early time, he just had it in his disposition that the worker was being abused by management and by the state, and he made it his cause to change that, and he used whatever tools he could to do so.
You know, President Grant said he did not read many biographies because they did not tell you about the boy, and he said famously, "Tell me about the boy and I will know the man." I think when you tell us about Hoffa's childhood, we get to know the man, and I think when you tell us about Chucky O'Brien's childhood, we get to know the man. My question is about two movies as we wrap this up. The first one is Russell Crowe, Cinderella Man. The working man in the Depression era, they had nothing and no one. They had no leverage. It was really Darwinian.
It was Darwinian, and that's the world that Hoffa grew up in, and he came to view the world through a social Darwinist lens. He said that life was a jungle, and if you don't kill, you will be killed, and that was basically the attitude he took towards everything.
And then the second movie is Jack Nicholson as Hoffa. I have resisted watching it until I was finished and talked to you on the air about it. Now I'm going to watch it again. Did it do a good job? It opens with Jack Nicholson waiting for the fateful meeting that we don't know if it happened or not. We don't know what happened, but do you think that's a good movie?
I mean, it's a good movie in its own terms. It's an interesting movie. It's not true to life at all. But Danny DeVito is the composite character that's based on Chucky, but in that movie. But the movie really, it takes so many. It departs from what actually happened so many times that if you care about what actually happened to Hoffa and what actually happened with him being killed, it doesn't do a good job of that. It does a good job of explaining the world in which Hoffa grew up.
All right, I want to conclude by something I wrote you about privately, and I don't want to be non-transparent. The double cross of the government of your stepfather is a lesson for everyone. It's happened to me in dealing with clients in regulatory agencies. They just double cross you, and people don't understand that, but the government is capable of that. How hard was that for you to write and recognize that? And I'm a Department of Justice alumni. You are much more senior than I. It's terrible to believe the DOJ can do that.
I have to say I'm pretty cynical, but I was shocked by what they did. They basically reached out to Chucky. They said, "We think you're innocent and we want to exonerate you publicly." They invited him in for a 4-hour legally fraught interview. I was told I shouldn't trust them. They gave me every assurance to trust them. He showed up for the interview. He told the truth for 4 hours. They agreed that he told the truth for 4 hours. And then they wrung their hands for 8 or 9 months and wouldn't come through with the promised letter of exoneration, even though they agreed that he wasn't a subject or target of the investigation and he was innocent. So they really mistreated him. They misrepresented what they were going to do. And I'm still angry and shocked by it.
Well, I walked away from it saying if they can do it to Jack Goldsmith, they can do it to anybody. and that every defense counsel, and you're acting as Chuck O'Brien's defense counsel, they have to be aware the government will screw you. It's the government.
They don't always screw you. I mean, I'm not so cynical to think the government always or even usually screws you, but when they have, if there's any wiggle room at all for them to look out for itself rather than to do the right thing, if it causes embarrassment, which is what this situation was, then there's a good chance they're not going to do the right thing.
That's absolutely crazy. Let me close by asking, how is In Hoffa's Shadow doing?
I don't really know how it's doing. It's gotten really extraordinary reviews. I couldn't have asked for better reviews, starting with yours, by the way, which was very generous when you wrote about it in the Washington Post. It's only been out a week. It's gotten amazing reviews, but I don't know how it's selling.
Well, I look forward to it being on the New York Times bestseller list. I think it will be. In Hoffa's Shadow, available in bookstores now everywhere. A Stepfather, A Disappearance in Detroit, and My Search for the Truth. Professor Jack Goldsmith, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Hugh. I'm very grateful.
It is a terrific book. I encourage you all to go and get. I really do encourage all of you to go and get it. Time to check in on what's going on in international markets. Birch Gold Group, birchgold.com/Hugh. If you are buying precious metals to diversify your portfolio, and you should have some precious metals to diversify your portfolio, you want to go to Birch Gold, BIRCH, doing that for the Steelers fan, birchgold.com/Hugh. The fact is everyone needs some diversification in their portfolio. Precious metals always are stable during, not always, I guess 99% of the time, they're stable during panics. I'm not going to say they go up during panics, but they are more stable than anything else during panics. Gold is at $15.15 this morning. You can move also part of your IRA, part of your 401k, right over to Birch Gold Group today. If you call them, or you actually just go to birchgold.com/Hugh or text Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. Don't know how to text? You're like Dwayne? Ask your son or daughter, or grandson, granddaughter. Text my name, Hugh, to 474747, or you can get the comprehensive 16-page kit on how gold and silver can protect your savings and how you can legally move your IRA or 401k out of risky stocks and bonds and into a precious metals IRA. To get that no-cost, no-obligation kit, text Hugh to 474747, or just to order gold today. And I like Maple Leafs and Eagles. Go to birchgold.com/Hugh. birchgold.com/Hugh. Time for my relief factor. All right, time for my relief factor, but it's a special relief factor day. Tomorrow, October the 4th, Mr. and Mrs. Pete Talbot. Today, October the 4th. They told me about it yesterday. Today, Mr. and Mrs. Pete Talbot, co-founder with Seth Talbot of ReliefFactor.com, celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. They're 50 years together. Pete, well done. Mrs. Pete, even better done. I always know that when you can go 50, it's the wife, not the husband. You put up with a lot. You put up with the creation of this amazing company. I know how hard they have worked on this. Congratulations on your 50th wedding anniversary to Pete and Mrs. Talbot. And by the way, they're my 4 Relief Factor I've got very little lukewarm coffee, but I don't need much because the pills are so good. And I take them. Not even lukewarm coffee. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. You should be taking them every single day. Every single day. ReliefFactor.com, $19.95 for the starter pack. Happy anniversary to the Talbots. I'll be right back. Sonny Bunch is next.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Clang went the trolley, ding, ding, ding went the bell, sing, sing, sing went my heartstrings as we started for Huntington Dale. Chug, chug, chug.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. Bang, bang, bang with the trolley. I don't know if Sonny Bunch has been to see Judy yet. Who knows? He probably doesn't like it. The fetching Mrs. Hewitt loved it. We'll find out. Sonny Bunch, welcome. Good morning.
Hugh, I got to be honest with you. Do you think I'm the sort of guy who's going to go to a Judy Garland biopic?
You're a film critic.
Opening day. Look, I am a film critic, but I am a man of the people. And you know what people aren't really that interested in, frankly, is a Judy Garland biopic. I'm just throwing it out there.
Renee was great. I can't believe you're bagging on Judy.
Fine. I can't be bothered with this. Come on.
All right. What were you bothered with? You're probably seeing the Joker back to back to back to back.
I'm with the people. I'm seeing Joker this weekend. I have seen Joker this weekend. I'm going to go back and see it again. I've got to absorb all the nuances of it. So Joker is it's funny. This movie has been pitched as the not a comic book movie, right? That it is. It's so dark and twisted and blah blah. All right, it is dark and twisted. It is a very intense look at it's a character study of a guy who has been failed by the society in which he lives. He has mental illness and nobody can help him. He is impoverished and has no way of earning any money. And he is beaten by local toughs on the street, kids running wild in packs on the street, and also bankers running wild on the subways, tormenting people, until he finally snaps and he shoots the bankers. I feel like this is not really a spoiler, that it has been shown in the previews, so hopefully, and nobody gets too mad at me here. But this all sends Arthur Fleck, who is the Joker's name, his real name, before he goes totally crazy, spiraling down the drain. He loses it and he turns into the clown prince of crime. Look, here's the thing. This movie is faintly derivative of a lot of 1970s Martin Scorsese movies, right? There's a reason Martin Scorsese is an executive producer on this, and at least part of the reason is that he won't sue for plagiarism. It is very reminiscent of Taxi Driver. Gotham looks like the New York of 1970s with porno theaters and garbage strikes and all sorts of awful things going on, rampant crime. And it has a character who feels like he's ripped right out of King of Comedy. King of Comedy, of course, was the great Robert De Niro movie in which he plays a hapless stand-up comedian who kidnaps a Johnny Carson-type figure in order to secure airtime on his show. And there is a very specific callback to that in this movie. Robert De Niro plays a Johnny Carson-like TV host who Arthur Fleck convinces to let him on, and there's no actual kidnapping, but things are still pretty nasty there.
So how good is this movie? I mean, the reviews make me think this is going to walk away with every Academy Award ever invented.
No, I mean, the reviews coming out of Venice were ecstatic, but there was probably a little bit of festival fever there. They were, you know, they're in their little bubble. The reviews have come down since. I think it's in the 60s now on Rotten Tomatoes. Because a lot of critics really hate this movie. Look, I can't really. One of the interesting things about how good is it? All right. So first off, it's pretty good. It's not great. It's not best movie of the year. Joaquin Phoenix probably deserves a Best Actor nomination. I don't know that it's going to get much more than that. It feels it's very oppressive. It's like a weight pressing down on you through the whole film. This movie, watching it is an experience. I wouldn't say it's pleasant. But it is very good.
But Fetching Mrs. Hewitt's not going now. She's going to go back and see Judy the second time.
I don't think it's not a movie for her. It is also very deliberately paced. Again, this feels like a throwback to the movies of the 1970s, where you have these character studies and the movie kind of flows along at its own slowish pace. But it's punctuated by these moments of really graphic and horrible violence. So it's a hard movie to recommend because it's not exactly a feel-good picture. But I liked it. I thought it was good, and I think Joaquin Phoenix is great in it.
Is there 30 seconds? Is there a supporting character as well, other than De Niro, who is good, great, even?
Zazie Beetz plays the Joker's neighbor, who he has kind of a crush on, and envisions himself having a sort of relationship with. She's very good, but this is very much Joaquin Phoenix's movie. He is in every scene, every shot. I mean, he's just there all the time.
Sonny Bunch, thank you. Follow him at Sonny Bunch. Follow him to the Joker if you'd like. I'm telling you, Judy's fun. It's depressing, but it's still fun. At least you get to hear clang, clang, clang goes the trolley. You don't have to wallow in Jokerism, but I'll probably see it this weekend. Thank you, Sonny Bunch. Coming up, Tim Alberta of Politico, Jonathan Swan of Axios, Rick Scott of Florida. Stay tuned, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 15 seconds.
Morning, glory, America, bonjour, hi, Canada, greetings to everyone out there and my special friends in China who listen every day. Thank you. In Israel, thank you for listening every day. But mostly I'm talking to people from Pittsburgh down to Fort Myer, from Bloomington out to Seattle, everywhere. And you know Tim Alberta, Politico Magazine chief political reporter, the author of American Carnage, must-read book. You can follow him at Tim Alberta. Good morning, Tim. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm a little nervous about the Spartans and Buckeyes this weekend, but otherwise doing fine.
Nervous? You should be resigned. After what I've seen of this and what they did in Nebraska, just be resigned, Tim.
You might have the best team in America.
I think we do. Let me talk a little bit with you about a tweet Jim Jordan put out yesterday after the testimony from Volker and others associated with the Ukraine investigation. Jim Jordan tweeted, "The facts we learned today from Ambassador Volker undercut the salacious narrative that Representative Adam Schiff is using to sell his impeachment ambitions. We hope the American people get to read the transcript of today's testimony and see the truth." When you're asking for the transcript, Tim Alberta, you're pretty confident it went well.
Yeah, which is what makes the release of the text messages last night all the more confusing, Hugh, because... Right, I agree with you. Typically, when somebody's saying, hey, put it all out there, then you would think that there is something, if not something exonerating, then certainly not anything incriminating in that transcript, and certainly in the testimony itself. But, boy, what we saw in these text messages last night is... I've seen the word damning thrown around. I would say it's worse than damning. I mean, this is exactly what people have been saying did not occur with any sort of a quid pro quo, and the text messages certainly suggest otherwise.
But the text, I've read them all, and I just said, I shrugged. I said he wanted an investigation into Burisma. He wanted an investigation into corruption. The text messages don't mention Hunter or Joe. They mention Burisma, and Burisma is dirty. What I'm at a loss, Tim. Burisma is a dirty company run by an oligarch. One of his moves is to hire Hunter Biden for $50,000 a month. That does not implicate the vice president in any way. That's not a connection that's shown. It's a dirty company in Ukraine. And we are looking into 2016 and the Ukrainian ties, and there are many. The Manafort ties are known. Why do people think these text messages are damning?
Because, Hugh, first, I think just lifting way up to 30,000 feet, do we think that President Trump cares about Burisma?
Yes, I do. I think that the president believes, and that I don't know if it comes from Rudy or if it comes from Ukrainian envoy Volker or if it comes from anywhere. I don't know where it comes from because I don't know much about Ukraine other than it ranked on, I think, Freedom House, the most corrupt state in the country, in the world. I thought Russia was, but Ukraine is. I thought China was, but Ukraine is. If you're going to dig into corruption in Ukraine, you've got to go after Burisma. And I separate Joe Biden out from this. What people are making the leap to is he's after Biden, not Burisma.
Hugh, Hugh, you separate him out from Burisma. You separate Biden from Burisma. It is increasingly difficult to see the president and to see Rudy Giuliani doing that. Bill Taylor says in this one text message last night, and I wish I had it in front of me right now, but I don't. But almost verbatim, he says, he said, you're telling me that we're going to hold up our military assistance to Ukraine to help with a political investigation? This is crazy, right? He is saying specifically that this is not just about Burisma, that this is not just about some abstract probe into corruption in Ukraine, which we all, I think, if we're being honest, know that Trump does not care about corruption in Ukraine.
I'm not stipulating that, Tim. He believes that the entire investigation into Russia was based on the Steele dossier and funky GRU playing of funky people in the United States against him. That's what he believes.
Yeah, so we're conflating things. Yeah, so Hugh, I think that it's possible to both believe that, but also believe that Trump does not care about Burisma nearly as much as he cares about the Bidens. This is something where if you talk to people around the president, when he started to catch wind of Hunter Biden and of the Biden family name being intertwined in this, suddenly it was a dog with a bone, and hence Giuliani's involvement, hence the suddenly dogged pursuit of figuring out why Ukraine has become the epicenter of Eastern European corruption, but that is not. Again, I hear what you just said a minute ago, and I don't disagree with it. I think that you can recognize simultaneously that Trump, that the president, and that his team wants to get answers about the genesis of the Steele dossier and of the Mueller investigation and any role that Ukraine or other countries may have played in that. I think that thing can exist in one silo while also recognizing that in this other silo, the president is actively seeking foreign assistance in trying to get dirt on the Bidens. I think that much is clear.
You know what the old Watergate phrase was? Follow the money. All right, follow the money. And so Burisma is about following the money. I don't know yet what the connection, if any, is to the Steele dossier. I am awaiting John Durham. I am awaiting the response of Horowitz. I'm awaiting all of that. But let me ask you this. In those text messages, which everyone is holding up today, well, not everyone. I mean, a lot of the Manhattan Beltway media elites are clutching them and saying, here we have it, here we have it. Does any of those text messages say, Donald Trump directed me to go after Joe Biden?
No, but do they need to?
No, but stop. Just let's stipulate. Do they mention Joe Biden at all?
No.
So, okay, thank you. End of no further questions, Your Honor. The text messages that are allegedly a smoking gun do not mention Joe Biden.
But Hugh, again, does it not seem, if you're reading those text messages, especially the ones from Bill Taylor, I mean, I would just ask again, and I think you know me well enough, Hugh. Like I have zero dog in any of these fights. I have never ever been prone to hyperbole or emotion or hysteria about the president, about any of these investigations, about any of it. But if you are just reading those as a neutral, fair-minded observer, anybody can put two and two together and understand exactly the alarm that Bill Taylor is sounding when he's saying, this is they are asking for this, for that, right? Quid pro quo. Now they are not. Nobody says Hunter Biden or Joe Biden's name, but they don't really need to. It seems very apparent in everything that's being discussed.
Here's what it says: we intend to initiate and complete a transparent and unbiased investigation of all available facts and episodes, including those involving Burisma and the 2016 elections, which in turn will prevent the recurrence of this problem in the future. Mr. Volker said, and that is what he wants to find out. If Ukraine had a connection to 2016, we need to know about it. If Burisma had a connection to it, we need to know about it. And I think we need to know why. And now I want to turn to Hunter Biden. I haven't turned to Joe Biden at all, because from all I can tell from the New Yorker article, Joe Biden is turning a blind eye to his son's dealings. There's one conversation that Hunter Biden said he had with his dad about it, where his dad says, "Do you know what you're doing in Ukraine?" And the son says, "Yeah, I know what I'm doing, Pops." And he leaves it at that. So it's kind of it's not very complimentary of the vice president, but it's not implicating. He just doesn't want to know. A cutout man. Why would the Burisma owner pay? Tim, just put everything aside, Tim Alberta. Why would Burisma's owner pay Hunter Biden $50,000 a month?
Oh, look, I mean, the answer to that, Hugh, is obvious, and anybody who's spent 5 minutes in Washington knows the answer to that, and I'm not excusing it.
But give us the answer. Give the Steelers fans the answer.
I think it's dirty and grimy, and don't get me wrong.
No, I know, but what do you think Burisma was hoping to get? What did he hope to get from that?
Influence, of
But
course.
with whom?
I'm sorry?
With whom?
With anybody, with the White House, with senior administration officials, with the State Department, with anybody whose name could possibly be profited off. I mean, Hugh, this is the oldest game in Washington. And again, I think it's gross. I'm not defending it at all. But I mean, that's the easiest. And frankly, if people in the Biden world, I think, were sharp, they would just come out and say that and bury it and say, look, Hunter Biden's doing what any politician's kid has been doing for the last 50 years, right?
And you're giving the least sinister view. All right, that is, I having dealt in this world when I was a justice in the White House, the least sinister view is they were hoping that he would talk to his dad about leading off of Burisma. The far more sinister view is, where does Hunter Biden go? What does he do when he's in the United States? And what does he tell Burisma when he comes back? Because Hunter Biden can go anywhere, right? Hunter Biden can literally go to Davos if he wants. And when you buy Hunter Biden, you are buying access to everything in America. And he's bought and sold. And people need to know that.
Hugh, so I want to go back to one thing, though. A minute ago, you and I are debating, the difference between the president's interest in Burisma and the president's interest in the Bidens. And you're saying, well, nowhere in these texts are the Bidens mentioned, and this is much more about 2016 and getting to the roots of the investigation and the Steele dossier and everything else. The President of the United States stood on the White House lawn yesterday and asked China to investigate the Bidens.
No, he didn't. He said, I'll play it for you. He did not say that. He said, if I were China, I'd be looking into it. He did not ask. And you know why? He wants us, you and me, to be talking about China and Hunter Biden because he knows Hunter Biden, or he believes Hunter Biden to be dirty. I think he said crooked. And he wants us to look
at... If Barack Obama was asking China to look into Tag Romney, we'd be talking very differently about this.
That's attributing to me a motive I do not have, Tim. Not fair. But I'm just telling you the facts lead me to Hunter Biden. I wish the journalists would do their job, which is to look at Hunter Biden and ask what was being bought there. I'll be right back, America. Tim Alberta, new book, American Carnage. Stay tuned.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Joined now by Tarzana Joe, our poet of the week. Hello, Joe.
Hello, you. Since nothing much is happening this week, I put it to the Twitterverse for what I should write about, and I've tried to incorporate all their suggestions, except Carl's, who said I should write about the village smithy. I don't know what village he lives in, but that's been done. But anyway, here goes. Ask me if I'm feeling happy, and I'll quickly tell you very. Despite all the indications, I must say my mood is merry. For the climate's finally changing. All the summer clouds are parting. Demon Deeks are undefeated, and the hockey season's starting. How my happy heart is beating. Politics has been forgotten. Can't wait for that trick-or-treating. Pumpkin pie and sauerbraten. Time to make that turkey dinner. Make the stuffing. I'm excited. If you're living near Tarzana, just drop in. You're all invited. Then let's start our Christmas shopping. Maybe meet me at the mall. I've got lists of things to purchase. I'm so glad it's finally fall. Joe, your mood is quite surprising. Asteroids are whizzing by, and you're smiling like the Joker. Please explain the reason why. None can dampen my elation, IRS or nasty mugger. If I met the House's speaker, if she let me, I would hug her. Every time she makes a statement, watch how those reporters scurry. She assures me with her candor I no longer have to worry. When she says the world is watching and the country's in the dumpster, she'll just raise another $1 million in donations for the Trumpster. So please join me in my jolly. Walk me on my merry way. Damn the market fluctuations. It's another perfect day. That's Happy Fall by Tarzana Joe.
Joe, a terrific poem. Thank you, my friend. Available, I hope, at tarzanajoe.com.
It is.
And for your poetry needs, you can write Joe at tarzanajoe@reagan.com, tarzanajoe@reagan.com. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Don't forget to thank Citizens for Truth and Drug Pricing because they sponsor this show, and that allows me to talk to you about Big Pharma and their abuse of prescription drug prices in the United States. Drugpricingtruth.com is where you go to get involved in the effort to get bipartisan work underway. All right? You need to get drug prices under control. That means patent reform legislation. That means fighting Big Pharma. Big Pharma spends $100 million lobbying. They want nothing to touch their patent protection and the patent manipulation that allows them to charge, for example, $1,300 a dose for insulin. Insulin, been around 100 years. How does it have patent protection? Look, you've got to get involved in this, otherwise the Congress won't. And the way you get involved with it is drugpricingtruth.com. Send that link to 10 friends, please, drugpricingtruth.com. And I've got my begging bowl out. It's October. I need you to support the Alliance Defending Freedom. I really do need you to support it. Lisa, my flight attendant yesterday, said she gives money to everyone. I only ask you 4 times a year. You know what I ask you for? I ask you for Angel Tree Camps. I ask you for Food for the Poor. I ask you for the Salvation Army. They all deal with the lost, the least, the abandoned. But once a year, I said, get out your pocketbook, get out your wallet, and support Alliance Defending Freedom. Because they defend freedom. They defend liberty. They defend your right to pray as you wish, to attend the church of your choice, to worship as you wish. And they defend atheists, by the way. And they defend your right to be in the public square, like in the town of Greece case. They are 9-0 in front of the Supreme Court, but they're fighting another Supreme Court battle right now about whether or not a funeral home can hire whom it wishes. A funeral home, which is one of the most religious places in the world, where people say goodbye and pay their last respects to their loved ones. I'll tell you about that case in the days ahead, but understand Alliance Defending Freedom is in every state, in so many cities, at the Supreme Court, every single day, working for you. And I need you to call 866-700-1060. $20, $20, $50, $500. If you're a deep-pocketed person who believes in freedom, Alliance Defending Freedom should be on your list of must-gives. Alliance Defending Freedom. The banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. Right now, the Michigan Funeral Home, a government is attempting to force it to allow a male funeral director who identifies as a female to violate the business's professional dress code by dressing as a woman while the home is ministering to grieving families. They say that that's required by a statute. It's not. Alliance Defending Freedom is right there, defending that family. Call 866-700-1060. 866-700-1060. Alliance Defending Freedom. I'll be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. Florida Senator Rick Scott joins me next on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Lethal Agent, a Mitch Rapp novel by Kyle Mills.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by United States Senator Rick Scott, who's been on the West Coast where I am. I understand you met Jim Byron, the executive vice president of the Nixon Library, at a political fundraiser where I am prohibited from going because of NBC and Washington Post ties. But I hope he asked you guys to keep working hard on showing up for the show.
Absolutely. First off, another day where the Democrats forgot their job. All they want to do anymore is just attack Trump. Lower prescription drug prices, no interest. Securing the border, no interest. Protecting our security, passing a budget, no interest. It's crazy what these Democrats are doing.
Rick, Senator Scott, I've got to go here with you because the New York Times today has a headline, Trump envoys push Ukraine to commit to investigating Biden. That is false. I have all of the emails. I just had Tim Alberta admit the Trump envoys were pushing Ukraine to investigate Burisma, which is a crooked company run by a crooked oligarch who happens to have employed Hunter Biden for $50,000 a month for reasons we don't know why. But Hunter Biden nor Joe Biden are mentioned in any of these emails, but they are the talking heads are trying to make people believe that they are.
Yeah. First off, why don't they slow down and get the facts? There's still no one has suggested to me that name the law that's been violated here. I mean, the only thing they care about is they hate the result of 2016. The Democrats hate that result, and they're trying to do whatever they can. If they can get rid of that, that'd be great. And if not, how can they impact Trump's reelection in 2020? That's all they're doing. They don't want to solve any problem.
Well, I want the Senate to do what the House is not doing, which is hold hearings that everyone can watch. I want Lindsey Graham at Judiciary. I know you're not on Judiciary, but when you see Lindsey, I want him to bring in Hunter Biden. I want him to bring in Burisma people. I want him to bring in every Ukrainian they know. I want them to bring in Manafort from jail and manacles. I want them to bring in everyone and find out, did Ukraine have any connection to Russia's attack on our election in 2016? Because it used to be we cared about that. I cared about it then. I care about it now. I'll care about it next year because it's going to happen again. And probably not just Russia, and we're not ready for it. And I also think we ought to maybe pass something like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act to prevent the children of powerful people from working on boards of compromised companies.
Right. How crazy that your child can go out and you can take them on military planes with you, help them get a deal. And it's crazy. So absolutely, they shouldn't be. The kids of powerful politicians shouldn't be doing this stuff. I know right now Richard Burr's Intelligence Committee is investigating exactly what happened. And I'll be glad to talk to, I saw Lindsey this week, and I'll be glad to talk to Lindsey. I know he cares about this. I mean, we need to get the facts out, right? In the case of Trump, we haven't seen anything to suggest he did anything wrong. But with Biden, even Biden said he did it.
Yeah, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was designed in the aftermath of some scandals where bribes were being paid by American companies. I think it was in Africa by an airline producer, but I can't recall exactly. And to me, disclosure has always been the transparency. Stephanie Roll was just ragging me online saying, your son worked for Scott Pruitt. I can't tell you how many times I've told people my son worked for Reince Priebus, Scott Pruitt. He works at the Department of State now. He's been in RNC politics for years. He's an adult son. And I've always told him one thing, Rick Scott, never work for a foreign government. Never, ever work for a foreign government or a foreign entity, because that's where you end up dirty. I mean, how simple is this for people to get?
Right. And how can anybody complain about transparency? I mean, tell people exactly what you're doing, and then they can make a decision.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, if Eric Trump had gone to work for Burisma for $50,000 a month, and I don't think, what would we be looking at right now?
Oh gosh, the double standard here is ridiculous. The double standard with the Clintons, the double standard with Biden. Look, at least I'll tell you what, Bill Barr is at least trying to figure out exactly what happened and put the facts out and figure out if somebody did anything wrong. I'm very appreciative of what Barr is trying to do.
Here's my speculation, Senator, and I'd like to get your assessment of this speculation. I think that Barr, Durham, and Horowitz are very close to telling us what they know about the FISA abuse. I believe what they know is that many Americans participated in compromising the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act standards, which I used to apply when I was at the Department of Justice, and that at a minimum, discipline will come down on people, embarrassment, and possibly indictments. And that part of this is a sideshow in an attempt to head off at the pass Barr, Durham, and Horowitz. What do you think?
Well, I'll tell you what. I think Barr's going to get the facts out, and we're going to find out if there's an abuse. And here's what all of us expect: if somebody's done something wrong, they ought to be held accountable, and that's exactly what Barr's going to do. Look, what we all hope is nobody's ever done anything wrong, but if they have, they ought to be held accountable.
Now, talk to me a little bit about the actual text messages you saw and how we get a transcript released. Congressman Jim Jordan wants a transcript of yesterday's hearing released. I've read every text message. They don't mention Joe Biden. They don't mention Hunter Biden. They say, we want you to investigate Burisma, and Burisma is dirty, as I've told you. There is no smoking gun here. Again, it's firing blanks. But I think the transcript, Jim Jordan said, boy, if you read the transcript, you'll see Adam Schiff embarrassed himself. You'll see a lot of good stuff. I don't think Jim Jordan said that exactly. I heard that from someone else. What do we do to get a transcript release?
How ridiculous. Schiff says there, well, we've got to have a transcript of Trump's call, but he doesn't want to put a transcript out of what he's been doing. What a double standard. We ought to, let's let the public know. Let the public know exactly what's going on, and let everybody make a decision. And then everybody will be held accountable.
I'd say to myself, if we just get all the facts out about what happened at the FBI, the Department of Justice, the intelligence community, who said what to whom, and why did they do things, and why did Hunter Biden get $50,000 a month, we'll be fine. But I just want the facts out. Senator, if I can turn to a substantive matter, let's do something different. I have been reading Graham Allison's The Thucydides Trap after talking to Admiral Stavridis about it, and it's actually kind of scary. The behemoth that is the People's Republic of China. And I'm not panicked. I just realize that they represent 1.4 billion people. They have such extraordinary economic energy. And Huawei is out there, and Tom Cotton, your colleague, believes it is an arm of the state. I'm going to be talking with Microsoft's Brad Smith, their president and chief legal officer at the Nixon Library today at 1:30 California time about this. And I'm curious, do we have a chance against China? I just look at China the way that that people must have looked at the United States in the 1880s and said, "Oh my God, we won't stop this country."
Let's remember this. It's called Communist China. President Xi is a dictator, and let's just look at who they are. Step one: we brought them into the WTO, and they've never opened up their markets like they're supposed to. They're stealing billions of dollars of technology every year, and they're not stopping. They monitor everybody's social media account, but they cannot figure out where the fentanyl is coming from in China. They know exactly where it's coming from. They're sending it to America to kill American citizens. They're taking American jobs, American citizens. I was just in Hong Kong. Here's what they're doing. I talked to one business guy that's opposing what Beijing is trying to do in Hong Kong, which in Hong Kong they have basic rights given to them in 1997 in the turnover from Britain to China. All right, they're not complying with it. The right to assembly. They say, "Oh no, you can't assemble." So when you assemble now, it's a violation of the law. Now and then they say, "Oh, you can't wear a mask," because what the people that are wearing a mask is they're worried that what's going to happen to their families. This business guy told me that in China they sent his sister down to tell him, if you don't stop, your nephew's going to prison for life. Not because he did anything wrong, because you're opposing Xi, who's an absolute dictator. These poor students and protesters, they're getting shot with tear gas canisters from above, which was not the intent of those things. They're supposed to be on the ground. They've been shot with a rubber disc, big rubber disc, not bullets, rubber disc at close range. You saw one protester get shot in the chest. I mean, this is just an unbelievable crackdown. And once they get done with Hong Kong, then it's Taiwan, then they'll focus on Vietnam. Eventually, they're going to come to America. This is a totalitarian regime that is not to be trusted.
All right, given that that's the worst case scenario, an expansive. Now, some old China hands tell me, don't worry, the Middle Kingdom does not want anything except its periphery secure. That's the most benign view.
Then why are they in Venezuela?
That's it. And I know the facts. Graham Allison is the alarmist view, and others have the more pacific view. My question is, how are we being serious when we're involved in text messages instead of, and by the way, Hunter Biden's wrapped up in China too. And I don't know if that's dirty or not.
Let's get the facts. We should know, how did he get the deal he got? Have you gotten a deal like that from China?
No, I don't. Again, I think it's best not to take foreign money from anyone ever. Right. I just think it's so easy to stay away from this.
Right. But we've got to understand, they're not our friend. They're an adversary. They're an unbelievable human rights violator. A million Uyghurs are in prison because of their religion. A million people
are astonishing.
In prison because of their religion.
It is. So my last question, how come we don't have a Department of Defense appropriation? When we are in a civilizational competition, I'm not going to say battle, we're not. We can co-evolve and we can get along and we can avoid conflict, but not if we disarm and not if we approve one continuing resolution after another that cripples the Department of Defense.
We passed it out of committee in the Senate, but Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, and we agreed to caps back in July when we did the debt ceiling. So I don't know, the Democrats want to focus on impeachment, but make sure we get a defense budget, that we can make sure we spend our money the right way, make sure we can defend the country. Oh, and they're too busy impeaching Trump.
It's pretty shameful. Senator Rick Scott, good to talk to you. I hope when you see Lindsey, tell him we need some hearings on all of this, and we need them now, because Adam Schiff, who is the Kramer, you watched Seinfeld, didn't you, Senator?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Kramer is Adam Schiff. He's Congressman Kramer. It's just kind of a clown show, but we need real hearings because Americans want real answers. And if something wrong was done here, I want to know about it. But I want to know about Ukrainian corruption. I want to know about the China deal. I want to know. I want transparency. Senator Scott, Rick Scott, thank you, my friend. Thank you. Don't go anywhere, America, except to relieffactor.com. I told you last hour it's Pete Talbot's 50th wedding anniversary. Happy wedding anniversary, Pete and Mrs. T. Mrs. T is like Mr. T. Mr. T is not what I think of when I think of Pete Talbot. Pete Talbot's one of the most generous, lovely, wonderful people I've ever worked with. Longtime sponsor of the show, but he's a friend of mine. And Seth Talbot, his son, they put Relief Act together years ago. I got asked by Lisa yesterday, the flight attendant. I was flying American yesterday, so I have nothing to complain about today. They're the best airline in America. And she asked me, do you really have all those troubles with United? I said, oh, my gosh, it's like United is cursed for me. That's what the fetching Mrs. Hewitt thinks. United is cursed for me. It's like they put a hex on me and everything goes wrong. But American, it's always smart. And they didn't pitch me for a credit card yesterday on American. I'm so glad the captive audience wasn't pitched. But I want to pitch you on relieffactor.com. She asked me if you got your Relief Factor. I took it out of my wallet. It's right here if you're watching on the camera. There it is. I said I got it with me in case Eskimo Pie Eyes, Joy, Generalissimo's other half had come in and sticky-fingered my Relief Factor, as I suspect has happened before, but she didn't. I took it in the first hour. She asked me how my arm's doing since I did the Heisman on the subway grate. I said, not so good, but I got my pills. Don't worry about it. ReliefFactor.com, 1995. Pete Talbot, happy anniversary. Thank you, Mrs. Talbot, for being such a great partner with him, allowing him to help so many people in the Pacific Northwest, and ReliefFactor.com. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming right back. I got to talk to Jonathan Swan. I'll have the inside skinny on what President Trump is thinking. But remember this. Stephanie Rule's dogging me today because my son worked for Scott Pruitt. I have always declared my son worked for Reince Priebus at the RNC. He worked for Cory Gardner on the Hill. He worked for John Kyle on the Hill. He's been in conservative politics forever. He's at the State Department now. He was with Scott Pruitt. I've always declared it, never hidden it. And he never worked for a foreign government. He never made $50,000 a month when he was in rehab. He's never been to rehab, thank God. I don't wish this on anyone for their children, what happened to Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, but it is not in those text messages. The smoking gun is firing blank. Stay tuned, America.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt with Jonathan Swan of Axios. He's timely arrived back from his honeymoon. Best wishes to Mrs. Swan, and congratulations to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
You've walked back into a very calm Washington, D.C. Nothing going on.
Yeah, I haven't missed anything.
Nothing happened. All right. I got to talk to you about rules of disclosure at Axios, rules of disclosure. Stephanie Rule and I are sparking it up on Twitter this morning. She poked at me and said, Hunter Biden isn't a big deal. Your son worked for Scott Pruitt at EPA. I always disclose that. My son is now at State. He previously worked for Reince Priebus. He worked for Cory Gardner. He worked for John Kai. He's an adult. He's been in RNC politics forever. I don't think that's Hunter Biden. And I've always told him, by the way, never work for a foreign government. Sorry, not even Australia. Never work for a foreign government. Is Hunter Biden a legitimate line of inquiry for people in the media, Jonathan Swan?
Of course. Of course it is. I mean, it's a big story. He's, when you're doing international business, when your father is in the position of power that his father was in, and you don't have apparently the background or the resume that would lead to that, of course it's a relevant line of inquiry for investigative reporting. I don't think any rational, reasonable person could dispute that.
Well, it is being disputed, and it's being conflated, and they're trying to say these text messages. I know you're just back. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the text messages. They do not mention Hunter Biden or Joe Biden. All they say is 2016 election in Burisma. And I don't know what they know. This is one of the things that reporters don't know. We don't know what the connection is, if any, and we know that there is no Joe Biden, Hunter Biden reference. And we know the president said this on the lawn of the White House yesterday. I want to play for you his China comment. It is cut number 7.
I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer. They should investigate the Bidens, because how does a company that's newly formed, and all these companies, if you look at, and by the way, likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens, because nobody has any doubt that they weren't crooked. That was a crooked deal, 100%. He had no knowledge of energy, didn't know the first thing about it. All of a sudden he's getting $50,000 a month, plus a lot of other things. Nobody has any doubt. And they got rid of a prosecutor who was a very tough prosecutor. They got rid of him. Now they're trying to make it the opposite way, but they got rid. So if I were the president, I would certainly recommend that of Ukraine.
Okay, so he's urging China to look into Hunter Biden. Is that an impeachable offense, Jonathan? So do Democrats say, I'm not asking your opinion, do Democrats say that's an impeachable offense?
Yeah, I mean, we're saying that the Ukraine situation was an impeachable offense, and this will just be another article of impeachment that they'll put together. I think the big, interesting question right now is how narrow they draft this. They write this impeachment drive. Do they stick to Ukraine, which I think is where Nancy Pelosi seems to be heading, or as a lot of the others in the caucus want to do they widen it out and pick everything else that people want to impeach on? A lot of the swing district representatives are very nervous about the widening of this. The interesting thing about the China comments is he's saying them out loud in public. So sort of if this was an email that was dug up by an investigative reporter and the comments were exactly the same and no different, and he was having a conversation with, a friend or something like that, not with China, they would take on a whole new meaning and would probably, if you're doing a hierarchy of impeachable offenses, just in terms of the optics of it, Democrats would elevate it. But I have no doubt that they're going to try and throw this into the basket.
Yeah, the Washington Times story has just been tweeted by the president. Quote, Ukraine envoy blows massive hole into Democrat accusations. Republicans at hearing find no Trump pressure. Close quote. The Ukrainian president also strongly stated there was no pressure put on him. Case closed. It's obviously not going to close because the president says it's going to close. But I want to see the transcript of yesterday's hearing, Jonathan. Do you think it will leak?
I don't know, honestly. It might take a little while. I think it will ultimately leak, but I don't know that it'll leak.
All right. You always work over the weekends, even I suppose when you come back from your honeymoon. What are you going to try and find out this weekend, Jonathan Swan? I would try and find out what Hunter Biden did for $50,000 a month, but what are you going to try and find out?
Well, I've got a lot of catching up to do, Hugh. I'm going to make 1,000 phone calls, so I'll be doing all sorts of things, but I really need to get my head back into this and start to figure out what's going on, both inside the Democratic caucus and inside the White House. The Hunter investigation is something that takes, serious, long-term, dedicated work. So I don't know that I'll be sort of advancing that story anything over the weekend, that's for sure.
Thank you, my friend Jonathan V. Swan on Twitter, one of the most connected, hardest working reporters inside the Beltway. If you are such a person, you're on this show no matter who you work for, no matter how often you criticize the president or compliment the president. I just want hard-working reporters to bring you the breaking news as it happens. This morning, the breaking news is that there was nothing in these emails, but there must be something in the transcript because the Democrats won't release the transcript of yesterday's hearing. They won't release it. Coming back with Dean Matthew Spalding of Hillsdale in D.C., talking about impeachment, even as they dedicate a new chapel on Hillsdale College campus. Stay tuned, America. Hour number 3 of the Hugh Hewitt Show straight ahead.
Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America Morning Glory. It is the Hugh Hewitt Show, and this means the Hillsdale Dialogue. The last radio hour of the week has begun on the Hugh Hewitt Show, and that is always devoted to something big, something important. It's usually with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. It is sometimes with Dean Matthew Spalding, who helms the Hillsdale in D.C. program, including their new Graduate School of Government, which you can find out about at hillsdale.edu. You can find out everything about Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu, including, I hope, pictures of the dedication of the chapel, which it happened this week. I'm not sure which day. Matthew Spalding. Dean, welcome. Good to have you.
Welcome and good morning. No, it's we learned some very important things this week about the permanence of the human condition. One we're going to talk about, which is politics, is always there. But the other one we learned about was the beauty and permanence of things like building the largest chapel in 70 years on a college campus that's been around for 175 years, and the importance and permanence of that. And the juxtaposition, I don't know about you, but I'm here doing that, dedicating the chapel yesterday with Justice Thomas. The juxtaposition between that and the permanence of that thing and what it points us towards, and the discussion about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and American politics right now is an amazing comparison of the greatest magnitude that really puts all of this in perspective.
Justice Thomas is a man of deep faith, abiding faith. I read his book twice on I Am My Grandfather's Son, which is a really moving memoir of his life and his commitment to first principles and to enduring truths, and of course to the truth of the biblical story. I am curious as to what he spoke about. Can you summarize it, or should we just wait for the transcript and the tape of Justice Thomas?
Well, you can go. It was all videotaped, and it's on our website. If it's not already, it probably is. But he gave a monumental speech, which really made a powerful argument about the profound, the fact of building this kind of place, this beautiful place, this chapel, which draws you towards the divine. He told a lot of personal stories and biblical stories about the importance of that, but also talked about what that meant to do that thing today, given the state of the modern academy and the universities and our educational system. It was a powerful speech that he gave that told a lot about himself and his own movement away from and then back to the church through prayer at places of houses of worship and chapels, and what that meant to him. But then this powerful argument with putting it into perspective of where we are as a country, as a civilization, to be doing that here at this time. It was a wonderful, wonderful speech that I think will add to that corpus of great personal reflections about the role of faith in his own life and in the country. It was a wonderful speech.
Yeah, Dean Spalding, to be drawn to the divine is something that America's higher education used to routinely embrace as part of their mission, often without regard to denomination, sometimes specifically, depending on the college or university and their mission and their founding. And I am reminded, at the center of Harvard is Mem Church, and I had to give a eulogy there once for one of my roommates who was killed when I was in college, and I was amazed that there in the middle of the campus, there was this inspiring bit of architecture to draw every Harvard student's attention to the divine. It was very comforting, actually, but I think it's being abandoned in the American academy, embarrassed by, as they are, these enduring things.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the drawing to the divine is a necessary component of education, which is to liberate the mind from the immediate things, to reflect on the higher things, the beautiful things, the perfect things. And without a recognition and an invitation to consider the divine, you're bereft of that aspect of education. I completely agree. And it's also a perfect example, and your example of Harvard and all these other universities, which almost all were, if not denominational, founded on some religious grounds. This is this perfect example of how the early 20th century, the progressive movement over the 20th century into modern liberalism, was a profound movement away from those things towards a notion that truth comes through science and the immediate and the worldly things, and a rejection of that other world as being based on values. Today, we often hear it's based on bigotry and hatred of other peoples, such that it's closed off a whole avenue to the very truth that universities are supposed to be pursuing. So I think it really is a prime case of how the modern universities have failed in its most important mission, which is to pursue that truth. And here at Hillsdale, by building this chapel now, it's a huge chapel, architecturally beautiful. Duncan Strike from the University of Notre Dame did this wonderful, beautiful design. To do it now is an act of defiance against that approach to education. And that's what we mean by it, but we also intend it to be around for 1,000 years. We're preserving that because it's the center, it's the heart of education.
Dean Spalding, I was reading an essay on the Midwest, which I reluctantly admit Michigan belongs to. And it said one of the characteristics of the Midwest is you cannot drive on a tank of gas without encountering a college of some sort. And I think of Oberlin, where my father and brother went. Oberlin was founded by Charles Finney. All right, the great pastor, the first school to allow in women, the first school to allow in blacks, and it was a religious institution. I think of Westminster College and Geneva College and Hiram College, all the way up to Hillsdale College. That was the norm. It is now no longer the norm. In fact, it is a source of conflict on campuses.
That's right.
Duke just exiled Young Life from its campus, which is one of the most efficacious and beautiful ministries, parachurch ministries in the country. There is an act of it. That's why I raise money for Alliance Defending Freedom so that people go there and contribute. There's a banner at my website right now because Alliance Defending Freedom protects college students on campuses.
Mm-hmm. No, that's well said. And it's not a peculiarity of the Midwest or some aspect of American life that wants to cling to its Bibles. There's something even more profound here that goes not only to the heart of America, but the heart of the West. The profound argument of the West was that there was a friendship, a cooperation, a together in a common community between reason, the great traditions coming from Greece and Rome, and revelation coming from Jerusalem. And that those two things weren't at odds with each other. They actually worked together to pursue the great truths that man can know and can come to know. That's the root of everything that the West stands for. And we're not merely rejecting churches here and there on college campuses, which we dislike because we might want to preserve our religious liberty. We're rejecting the greatest accomplishment intellectually and morally of the West by separating these things. Today it's assumed that reason and revelation are at odds. They're always fighting, and they're bound to fight. And in that debate, modernity has taken the side of reason, which they've interpreted to be science in a narrow sense of reason as opposed to philosophical reason. Defending religion on college campuses, defending faith within the context of teaching the sciences, teaching philosophy, teaching literature. That's what the West stands for. It's a representation of the West. That's not a narrow doctrinal religious sense that we merely want to produce people of certain faiths. That's what the West means. That's what religious liberty actually means, is a friendship of reason and revelation. That's what America means when we read the Declaration of Independence.
Let me close this segment.
Of religious liberty.
I want people to know that Duncan Stroik is the Christopher Wren of America. I have been in his chapel at Thomas Aquinas College. I have not yet been to the Hillsdale Chapel because I'm only invited in January when it's cold and no one else will go. But I am certain it is a place of beauty and solemnity and inspiration. How will it be used? We have a minute to the break, Dean Spalding.
It's going to be used constantly. We're going to do evensong. We had a concert last night with our orchestra. We'll have religious services. We'll have speakers, especially on topics that are about moral and religious questions. And it's on the center of campus. It's completing the quad of the campus, and it's harking back to the original mission of the college. But he has done a beautiful thing. It's designed after St. Martin in the Fields in England, which, of course, inspired Philadelphia's Christ Church, and it's meant to bring back all of those things. We had 1,300 people. It can fit 1,300 people in it, the whole student body of the college.
Congratulations on that. When we come back, we're going to turn to much less elevated things, the dirt and grime of politics, a non-impeachment impeachment inquiry, a low blow after low blow at the President of the United States as Adam Schiff leads a clown car of Democrats down a road that will eventually go over a political cliff. I'm telling you, stay tuned. The Hugh Hewitt Show, the Hillsdale Dialogue, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I am Hugh Hewitt. Dean Matt Spalding leads Hillsdale in D.C. You can follow Hillsdale in D.C. on Twitter at Hillsdale in D.C. You can get every one of our Hillsdale dialogues, which is the last radio hour of every week, at hugh4hillsdale.com. And everything Hillsdale is at hillsdale.edu. Dr. Spalding, before we get into the specifics, let's talk about impeachment and its original intent. From the Federalist Papers, which actually got mentioned on Meet the Press this weekend, bravo, Chuck Todd.
That was a first.
It was a first, and I'm very happy to have the Federalist Papers. If we read them all and take them all for granted, they will, for example, confirm you can't prosecute a president. Impeachment is the only ruling. What is impeachment intended to do? What did the framers have in mind?
Well, I'm still processing going from the sublime to the ridiculous here as we move into this conversation. This is amazing. But having said that, the transition through the Federalist Papers and the Founders is actually a good way to start it, because they meant impeachment to be a very serious thing for a very good reason. Remember, the King of England could not be removed, and they've had problems in the past. I mean, the English past, there's their own history. When they try to remove the king, I'm your king, you can't remove him. Your option is to perhaps behead him. They're actually trying to put into the Constitution a process to remove the executive that allows for the continuation of constitutional government. That being said, when I went back and you review these things and see what they said and why they put this process in, they did it so that it would not become overly politicized. Everyone brings up that great Gerald Ford quote, impeachable offense is whatever the majority of the House says. And we have the sense that it's merely a political question. But for the founders, and I think for pretty much all of American history, what that meant, a political question, was not a narrow, partisan political question, perhaps in the way Ford was, I think, incorrectly implying. What it meant was a constitutional question, something of great magnitude, of great significance to constitutional government, but something for which there are standards and there's a process. And it isn't merely the passions and whims of the moment. And it was not intended. In fact, it was designed to prevent it becoming a way from attacking and going after and weakening and trying to remove your political enemies merely because you disagree about them on a political question. Because that's always the problem in constitutional politics, that he who has the majority, who can get away with it, uses it to go after political enemies, and that's a death knell to self-government in a representative democracy.
Now, when Bill Clinton was impeached, it was for lying under oath. People think it was for having sex with an intern. It wasn't. It was for lying under oath. And George Washington once famously said, if oaths are not worth what they are taken to be, then we are in serious trouble, because it goes to the moral uprightness of people. That was the impeachable offense, a high crime and misdemeanor. The American people disagreed, and therefore they punished the House of Representatives that impeached Bill Clinton in an off-year election where they ought to have won a lot of seats. They lost 5, and Newt Gingrich was obliged to resign, because the American people have referendum on impeachments at the next election. Is that a fair statement?
No, it's a very fair statement. The standards force us to go through a procedure that ultimately brings us in front of the American people in an electoral process, which is why you begin in the popular branch, the House, which should, under most circumstances, it's designed to assure that the proceeding of an impeachment has popular support, but they can only bring the charge. Then it goes to the Senate, where there's a trial. The trial is overseen by the Chief Justice, not the Vice President, who's the head of the Senate. The Vice President has an interest here. It's the Chief Justice. It's meant to push through this process so it's kept within the 4 walls of the constitutional structure. It's consistent with popular government, which means it ultimately goes to the sovereign in an election. That's very important, and the American people will see and are watching whether it has the requirements to meet those standards of a technical violation of law, a crime, or something, at least a charge you don't even have here. This is an impassioned frenzy.
When we come back to the Hillsdale Dialogue, we'll talk about the specifics of the case pending. Go nowhere, America. It is The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Don't forget to sign up for the Hughiverse. All of Hugh's broadcasts on demand, the after show, which in my opinion is worth the price all by itself, Dwayne FM, and all sorts of bonus content. www.hughiverse.com.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break. 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm joined by Dean Matthew Spalding of the Hillsdale Graduate School of Government inside the Beltway, D.C. Hillsdale is a lantern of sweet reason in the shadow of the Capitol. It is a lighthouse of sweet reason in the north. Everything Hillsdale is at hillsdale.edu. Now we talk about the specifics of the new impeachment inquiry, as it's been termed by Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. But Matt Spalding, there are foreigners who listen to this, so they really, we have to break it down sometime, especially to my new friends in China. I've learned I'm listened to daily by people in the PRC. Impeachment is a process that typically begins with a vote of the House of Representatives to conduct an impeachment inquiry. No such vote has occurred here. No special committee has assembled. No particular committee has jurisdiction. What does that tell you?
It tells us a lot. I think that look in the broader perspective for a moment. I think a lot of us, and I'll put myself in this category, we're looking at this the wrong way. When we first started going down this path months ago, when we talked about it, we were talking about, well, is this like the Clinton impeachment, or is this like the Andrew Johnson impeachment? I think this is moving towards a Justice Samuel Chase type impeachment. But as more and more has this occurred, and we look at the specifics now, this isn't following that path at all. I think that we're looking at it the wrong way. This is not actually an impeachment process at all. You're right in pointing out that the House never took a vote, which means there's no committee, which also means, among other things, that committee does not provide the minority any subpoena rights, which has happened in past impeachments. And then this recent hearing with Volker, in which they tried to prevent staff from even coming. This is a different process. We shouldn't be thinking about this in the normal way of a legal, constitutional, procedural process that's following the rules and the normal way that these things have occurred historically in the past. It's not that at all. This is a political movement. This is a political process that's meant to do precisely what I think the founders intended to prevent, politicizing it for political reasons, to get out ahead of some other things like the IG report and Barr's investigations prior to an election. It's got a political outcome. It's all about the outcome. We'll figure out the details later. That seems to be where this is moving.
I also want to say, Matt, that Dean Spalding, that the Democrats don't want to label it an impeachment inquiry formally, and they don't want to have a vote because they don't want to put their members who are in Trump-leaning districts in the position of having voted to open this inquiry. And therefore, it continues to be unfocused and spread over 5 committees. But this morning, the president just tweeted 20 minutes ago, all presidents, as president, I have an obligation to end corruption in caps, even if that means requesting the help of a foreign country or countries. It is done all the time. That has nothing to do with politics or a political campaign against the Biden. This does have to do with their corruption. Now, the president is making an argument that corruption justifies American law enforcement action. In fact, Robert Mueller made 13 requests for cooperation of different foreign governments, and no one said a word. In fact, every day the Department of Justice and the Department of State work with foreign governments to get corruption and other law enforcement matters at the top of their agenda. And we've been leaning on Ukraine for a decade under President Obama and under President Trump to clean up their act. How in the world are they going to turn this into an impeachable offense?
For which we have a bilateral agreement between the United States and Ukraine to cooperate over the particular question of corruption. It's an amazing thing. If he weren't doing that, if he weren't actually pursuing the corruption, I think we would hold him accountable for that. That would be an argument against what he's doing. This really does strike me as kind of an Alice in Wonderland moment, right? This is Alice hearing the Queen of Hearts, right? we're going to execute him first. It's the verdict. We'll have a trial later. We'll figure out the evidence. It's just backwards, and I think it's a political. It's completely political. Think about why Speaker Pelosi did what she did. I think she had to do that. She needed to absorb her base and keep it happy, but also pulling it into the Speaker's office, but it's not a formal inquiry, means she can control it through the Speaker's office. She can turn it up. She can turn it down. It gives her a lot of authority. And I think what she's doing is she's trying to play the moment. She doesn't want to make those vulnerable members vote right now. But if she can turn the heat up, moving into towards the end of the year, perhaps once she gets there, she can do it. So I think she's using this process of trying to gather evidence and trying to do hearings as a way to actually turn up the volume, weaken his numbers, and hopefully help those members ultimately to get there. So it seems like that kind of move, and the particulars of what's going on here, the discussion with Ukraine, the Barr's investigation, the IG report, all these details coming out, which a lot of very smart people are writing about. Andrew McCarthy over at National Review was just excellent, as he always is, wasn't the Mueller report. All of that, I think, is very interesting and helps us see a roadmap here. But it's very important that we back up and look at this. Whether you agree or whether you disagree, whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, this is another political attempt. This is a political movement to try to weaken a president of another party who's in office. And I think they're looking at votes of their own members in the House, which is a political question itself. But also that is a reflection of what? The upcoming election. It has everything to do with that and very little, if anything, at this point, given that they've tried this through the Emoluments Clause and the Mueller investigation and the emergency powers use. Now they've latched onto this. It seems to me like another case where we know we want to go. We'll put the story together we'll build the narrative. We'll put it together. We'll try to find evidence. And all of a sudden, the debate becomes focused on the discussion in the midst of the investigation. Was there a cover-up? Were they hiding something? It becomes a secondary discussion as opposed to the primary discussion. Have impeachable acts occurred for which we must take the most important congressional, use that congressional power of the highest magnitude to remove a president, which has the effect of reversing an election of the American people. That is very significant.
And I want to stipulate something. I want my friends on the left and right to understand. I'm talking to Dr. Matt Spalding. He and I would agree. It is very possible for a president, not this president, for a president to commit an impeachable offense, in our view, in their dealings to it with foreign governments. If, for example, I use this hypothetical with Lindsey Graham. I said, Senator Graham, if the president called up Putin and said, Lindsey Graham has got me mad, I want to put a contract out on him, and you're pretty good at that, would you kill him? And Lindsey broke in and said, this is a hypothetical, right? And it was a good joke, but I was trying to point out there are obviously impeachable offenses a president could do in his conduct with foreign relations. That would be high crimes and misdemeanors that were not treasonous. That would just be putting out murderous hits via foreign governments on political opponents would be absolutely impeachable.
Right.
But
and think about it in broader terms here. You can go too far such that the Congress, which is a separate branch of government, is now impeding upon the president carrying out his constitutional responsibilities of conducting foreign affairs, which includes speaking with heads of states in other nations. All of this suggests we're moving in a very dangerous way, which constricts the president from actually doing what is actually their job. And we hold them accountable in elections and in terms of outcomes, but we have to give them the room to do that. Every president has had that in the past. Every president must have that for this system to work.
And I want people to hear the text messages, which are the cause of the day. The Democrats have released text messages that they say prove everything. I read them. They don't do anything. It's exactly what our people should be. The texts show the three men, two government officials and Rudy Giuliani, discussing language for a proposed statement by Ukraine. On the morning of August 13th this past summer, Mr. Volker, working for the Department of State, sent Mr. Sondland language that they wanted to be added to an earlier draft sent by the Ukrainians. Quote, this is the language they wanted added. We intend to initiate and complete a transparent and unbiased investigation of all available facts and episodes, including those involving Burisma and the 2016 elections, which in turn will prevent the recurrence of this problem in the future. His counterpart wrote back, said, perfect, he would send it along to a Ukrainian president. 4 days later, Mr. Sondland texted Mr. Volker as they still wanted the Ukrainian president to give us an unequivocal draft, specifically citing the two issues that Mr. Trump had focused on. Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company, and the belief that Ukraine had interfered in 2016 American election. Biden is never mentioned.
Right. No, I mean, look, this has, setting this immediate example aside, would they ever have those kinds of conversations? In, a discussion about a transparent investigation. Would they do that if they were merely trying to get rid of their political enemies? This makes no sense. It only makes sense. All these communications only make sense if you put it in the context of a larger investigation, which is a legitimate investigation conducted by the Department of Justice, by the Attorney General, into the 2016 elections. That makes the whole story look very different. If you ignore that, if you take that piece out of there, this looks pretty shady, but that's not the context. That's not the situation in which the president is acting here.
When we come back from break, we'll talk about, again, the Washington Times piece that the president has tweeted about this morning as we move from the very grand at the beginning, the new chapel on the campus of Hillsdale College, to the very specific, the headlines of the day, which is the way that one ought to argue, from general principles to specific examples, not from specific examples to the principles you wish existed. Let me remind you, though, as we began talking about a university with a chapel on it, there is one legal defense organization in America, one, that every place and every day and everywhere will defend everyone's right to religious freedom, to be free of state-sponsored religion and to exercise their religious beliefs freely. That is Alliance Defending Freedom. They are fighting another case now before the U.S. Supreme Court. This involves a Michigan funeral home, by the way, Michigan Day, I guess, against government's attempt to force it to allow a male funeral director who, quote, identifies as a female, close quote, that's in the complaint, to violate the business's professional dress code by dressing as a woman while he ministers to grieving families. ADF is defending the original understanding of the statute regarding non-discrimination, that it does not expect to people who identify as genders other than their biological one at birth. It's got nothing to do with that when it was passed in the 60s. All you need to know is that Alliance Defending Freedom is going to win another one. There's an ADF banner at the top of my homepage at HughHewitt.com, but understand cases like this, they sprout like weeds all over the United States. ADF has got to go and help people. Call them, 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060, or go to the big banner at the top of my website, Alliance Defending, and please be generous. You can also send some happy anniversary thank yous to Pete Talbot. He's the founder of Relief Factor along with his son, Seth Talbot. Pete Talbot celebrating his 50th anniversary, and Mrs. Talbot today. We love Relief Factor. I take it every day. I'm almost over my Heisman on the subway grate, and I credit in part ReliefFactor.com. I also credit not falling down again on the subway grate. But ReliefFactor.com, my daily dose of the natural supplements that provide support for the temporary relief of the minor aches and pains that plague your life. And if they do because of exercise, because of falls, because of aging, you ought to try ReliefFactor.com. Today, $19.95. Get started. Celebrate Pete's 50th anniversary by going and giving yourself a 3-week starter pack at $19.95. Thank you, Relief Factor. Congratulations, Pete Talbot. I'll be right back, and your wife, with Dean Matt Spalding when we return to the Hillsdale Dialogue after this.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt with Dean Matthew Spalding, of the leader of the Hillsdale Graduate School of Government in Washington, D.C. Emo over at Media Matters. I don't know if he can ever attack the Hillsdale Dialogue. He'll probably attack my son working at State, or he'll probably attack my defense of the president, but not the Hillsdale Dialogue. Emo Matt Spalding is the fellow they assign at Media Matters to listen every day to this show and try and find something to assault me with. Here's the breaking news. What a job, right? To have to listen to talk radio. Maybe I'll convert him or her into being actually sweet reason they're driving their life. President Trump just tweeted out, breaking news, unemployment rate at 3.5%, drops to a cap's 50-year low. Wow. America, let's impeach your president, parens, even though he did nothing wrong, close parens. Now, I want to make 2 points. The unemployment rate would not absolve an impeachable offense. But he is making the point that a political diversion from his stellar record that is not impeachable offense is a nightmare for the country. Do you agree?
I do. This is exactly what I think the structure in the impeachment process is designed to prevent this kind of politicization. What's going on right now is we're discrediting the impeachment process. I actually want to defend impeachment as a constitutional process. It's extremely important. But it's being completely politicized in a way that I think is not good for the country. It's not good. I mean, think about it. Congress has delegated all its powers. It doesn't budget anymore. It's got very few significant powers left. And here's how it's treating this most important one called impeachment. This is extremely problematic. This really does. This strikes me, as I alluded to earlier, going back to the history of this. This is like Justice Chase. They want to get rid of him as a way to make a political point going into future elections.
Would you explain Justice Chase to people? They won't know Justice Chase. We're talking about Steelers fans here.
Justice Chase is before, this is right around the election of 1800. The Jeffersonians want to impeach Justice Chase, who he was the equivalent of Donald Trump of his day. He didn't tweet, but he said whatever he thought. He was very opinionated. And they went after him because of that, because they ultimately wanted to go after the Federalist Party's control of the judiciary. And they were going after John Marshall after that. So it was part of a larger political fight, of an electoral political fight, and they went after and impeached Justice Chase. He was acquitted by the Senate, wasn't convicted. But having said that, that's the model here, which is it's completely political. And we've been moving away from that. Which is why we have these debates about what is a high crime and a misdemeanor. And in the case of Clinton, it was a very technical thing. That's not going on here. This has something to do with politics broadly. We're going into an election year. I think they're worried about, they don't know how to deal with this president and what he says and what he does. You've got a strong economy. He's playing for different constituents. This, I think, is part of the level at which our politics are, which is everything is a fight. They wanted to impeach Kavanaugh. They fought Kavanaugh tooth and nail. They've taken all these efforts. I worry that this is really undermining and weakening the rule of law and our constitutional system to fight these things this way. And I hope the American people are watching this and keeping track of how this is playing out for their own sake.
I think they are. And I think people on Twitter are confusing their own circle of friends. Molly Hemingway, who works for Hillsdale as a teacher, has often pointed out the Beltway gets very angry when people don't agree with their collective wisdom. They're very mad at me this morning because I just said the texts don't prove what you say. They're mad at me. And they get very angry, but they also get very disconnected from what the country really thinks. And I got a minute left, Matt. I don't think the country thinks this is remotely close to an impeachable offense.
No, I completely. This is another example about how modern liberalism progresses and wants our country run by a bunch of experts who are to administer government. This really does grow out of Woodrow Wilson. You still the same problem. This is not how self-government should work. This is not how the constitutional process should work. If that process works correctly, they should go into an election, and the American people would deal with this question, looking at the particulars, but also looking at the other things that are going on in this political circumstance and context. This, I think, is becoming unfortunately, a political farce, and I fear that for the sake of constitutional government.
Look at the arc of this conversation. It has followed the arc of American government. We began with the high and the lofty, the dedication of the new chapel at Hillsdale College with the address by Clarence Thomas, and we ended up talking about the evisceration of standards when it comes to impeachment. It is not a good trend line, Matt Spalding. 30 seconds.
It is not, and it worries me, but as is always the case, putting these things in perspective, in the perspective of the Constitution and our history, but in this greater perspective, this juxtaposition, which I'm living in my own life right now, of just having dedicated this chapel towards the permanent things. When we look at it from that perspective, we see it for what it is, and I trust the American people to see that as citizens and can shape the future of this country.
I hope you are right. I pray you are right, and we will continue that fight next week on the next Hillsdale Dialogue. Congratulations to everyone in the Hillsdale community for their beautiful new chapel, to Duncan Stroik and everyone who contributed to its building, and to everyone who will stand in its pulpit and preach words of uplift and enduring inspiration. Thank you all. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Generalissimo. Great week of broadcasting. I'll be back on Monday, America, with the next Hugh Hewitt Show.